Spoiler alert, it's a bit of a boring episode, lots of talking. Enjoy anyway. Also, Dumbledore dies. Hi there guys, as always welcome back to another episode of EXCL Garage. Hope you guys are doing well. Now as I said in the previous episode, we hit the peak of the LS3 build. Now it's all downhill from here in a good way, and we actually start getting to the point where we're putting new bits back on the engine. So last episode we painted the block and honed all the cylinders, and then this episode we've got the pistons back there to re-ring. Going to drop those in the bores. Going to put the bearings on, going to check the clearances of the bearings. Hopefully it's all good. And after that it's things like the new cam, new lifters, get the reverb heads back on that are up there on the shelf. Just all the good bits, which I'm really looking forward to. So hopefully I'll be able to explain a few bits as we're going along, but stay tuned, it's hopefully going to be a fun one. Now let's jump into it. Right, here we go. So as I said in the intro guys, I've already got done a couple of bits here. Got all the pistons ringed and checked the ring gaps and checked the bearing clearances. I did that with my dad. Of course, haven't shown you guys. So that's what we're going to do now. So I've got the engine all set up over there. We're going to measure piston 2 with its bearings, and I'm going to get you guys set up just above. Hopefully this gives you a decent view down into the piston there. So what we got here is 2 piston rings. We have top ring here. You can tell that because of this little M. If I look at the instructions, it tells me that this mark means the top, and as well as that, you will not be able to see it, but this ring actually has, oh, you might be able to, a tiny chamfer there. And like I say, with the instructions, this tells me that this is the top ring, this is the top side. This is what we're going to measure first. So they're coated in light misting of oil, and we just need to get that in there. And what we're looking for is, so right at the top here is a tiny little gap, and that's necessary for the piston to keep compression without, of course, you know, building compression to a point where it explodes. So we just need to measure that gap. Now, I must admit I already know these gaps, so I'm just kind of doing it for your guys' sake. We're just gonna make sure it's all nice and centered up in the bore. Use a piston. There we go, get it all nice and flat in there. And then we've got these tiny feeler gauges. Right now, if this were a brand new piston and a brand new block, then the clearance that we would be expecting would be 0.23 millimeters to 0.44 millimeters. So here's 0.23, there you go. And that can very easily wiggle around in that gap. So now we're going to go up, and like I said, I've already tested these, so rather than go for each individual one, let's just go right up to 0.4, and that is also quite loose in there. So now we're going to go up to the higher end of what a brand new block should have for its clearance. So like I said, 0.44 millimeters, this is 0.45, so it's actually 1/100th of a millimeter larger than what the clearance range should be, and that's actually quite snug in there. Now, of course, this isn't a brand new block and this isn't a brand new piston sleeve, so the clearance in that case actually goes up to 0.5 millimeters. So just to double check, here we go, we got 2 more, 0.48 and 0.5. So 0.5 can go in, but the next one up is really tight. I don't want to force it in there, so that's good. It's at the higher end, granted, the clearance for a service engine, which this is. That's fine. Bigger gap generally means, you know, slightly less compression, but a little bit safer at high temperatures. So I'm really not that worried. It's not too big and we don't have to file them. So that's perfect. Let's get this out of here. Here we go, move on to the second compression ring. Once again, we know this one's a top. Little indent right there. So here we go, this goes in. So of course, you just saw the theory behind it all. You generally kind of measure your way up, but let's just dive right into the higher end of it. So second compression ring on a service engine, the higher end of the clearance range is 0.76 millimeters. So let's find that, shall we? Here we go. We have here 0.75 and 0.8. So let's test both of these. Hopefully this one should go in and this one shouldn't. 0.75 is also very tight. So this actually go down rather than up. Here is 0.7, also very tight. 0.65, also very tight. And we're just going to keep going down until we find the one that does fit, as long as we don't go below the minimum clearance. 0.6, 0.55, There we go, 0.55, that is very snug in there. 5.8, okay, that's even snugger. So it's 0.58 on the second compression ring, cylinder 2, on a serviced engine. So I'm quite happy with those. Of course, it just means that our gap on our first compression ring is a little bit high, but I'm happy with that. And the gap on the second compression ring is actually well within the specs of even a production engine. So overall, I'm very happy with that. Our next step will be to go down to the crank journals and measure the bearing clearance. Let's do that. See you guys in a bit. Right, so here we are down at the crank, and here what we're going to be measuring is the clearance between the connecting rod bearing and the crank itself. Of course, there needs to be a certain level of clearance that the crank journal gets enough oil to operate properly. There's not too much of a gap where, of course, the bearing might just spin on the journal, and it's not too tight where it's going to bind or cause any kind of resistance to be, too little amount of oil between the two, and it would just grind away at each other. There's proper ways to do this. You'd normally get a big micrometer, measure one, measure the other, so on and so forth, make lots of notes. Of course, perhaps if you were building a brand new engine, a blueprinted engine, that's what you'd want. Being that this, as we already know from the piston ring gaps, is a service engine at the end of the day. So what we're going to use is this thing called Plaster Gauge here. And all this is it's a stick of very, like squishy plastic, and you cut off these little segments. You put a little bit between the two, crank it all down, get it all nice torqued up to spec. And what that would do is it would squash out the plastic, and then you measure it against these marks. Of course, the more squished out it is, the tighter the gap is, and the thinner it is, there's less of a gap. So what we're looking for actually is a gap between 0.23 millimeters, so a little bit off this scale, and 0.76. So any of these will be absolutely fine for our engine. So let's get one of the pistons in here, get a bearing on it, and crank it down and look at squished plastic. There we are, got some lovely new bearings here. We're just going to pop these into the rod, make sure they're lined up properly. There we go. Nice satisfying little click, and it's in. So doing this without the piston rings on the piston, because it just makes it easier to push up the cylinder bore. Here it is, so it holds itself nicely there. If we were to actually be installing these for good, we would be using plenty of lubricant, but seeing as we're measuring, we want to do it dry, because any lubricant will actually probably skew our results. So we got the cap here ready to go. We have our tiny bit of plastic there. Hopefully you can see that right there. Probably zoom in for you guys. We're just going to, now we just need to torque these down to spec. So let's go get the tools for that. Right, so the first step of this puzzle is 15 foot-pounds. Going to do gradually here, almost there. There we go. And then after that, it calls for 85 degrees. Like a lot of these American engines, they are indeed a angled torque fitting. And fortunately with the rod bolts here, they're not torque to yield, as in they don't stretch to the point of being useless, thankfully. So what we need to do is get this angle gauge here to 0, we're pressed up against a hard spot, and then we're going to do 85 degrees. So there we go, we're at 0 so far. So let's go 85. 30, 60, 70, 80, 2, 4, 5. There we go. Now we just got to do the same on the other one. 60, 70, 80, 2, 4, 5. And we're done. All we need to do now is slacken these off, take the cap off, and see how it's stretched. Right, here we go. Cap is off. Let's put this to one side. And now what we're doing is that bit of splashed out plastic you can see there in the middle of your screen. We're just going to measure it up against this. So it's actually, it's thinner than 0.25, slightly thinner than 0.38. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
See if I can zoom in here for you guys. Of course it is thick on the outside, it will be, so we're taking it from the middle. Looks very much like a 0.51, and that's actually smack bang in the middle of our bearing clearances. So I'm very, very happy with that. Overall, despite the appearance of this engine, looks like it's lived quite a healthy life. So now what we're going to do is we're going to clean all this off. We're going to take the piston out, ring it up properly, and we're going to get them in the engine. Right, so here we are on the bench in the vise. It's not clamped in, but we're here with our good friend piston number 2. Giving it, you know, whatever, a light clean up. It's still got some gunk on it, but this will all come off with a few heat cycles. We're going to be putting on the piston ring. So we're going to start off with the oil control ring. It's the bottom ring. Goes in this really big groove at the bottom here. And this one's nice and easy because it's got this super flexible, as you can see. But what we need to do is we need to place them in a very specific way. So the oil control ring, this kind of jagged ring, is it's said that the gap, here's the gap, cannot go anywhere within an inch of a gap in the ring land, which the gaps are where my fingers are here. So slap bang in the middle here. And that's not the only piece of the puzzle when it comes to the oil control ring. We also have two, yes there are 2 rings here, additional parts that kind of sandwich together, which makes it a 3-piece oil control ring. There we are, 2 of these, and they're totally identical. There's no up and no down. They're very thin, but one goes underneath the oil control ring. So the way I like to do that is just to start at the bottom and work our way up. Here we go. So working our way up. Now, you don't need to use the ring pliers for these rings because they're nice and flexible, the oil control rings. It just finds its way in there. So the corrugated ring gap is here and the lower oil control ring gap's here. The reason for that is because not only can it not be near any of the actual gaps in the ring lands, it has to be outside of an inch roughly of the gap in the corrugated ring. So now here's the other one. This one goes on top, this one just goes over, somewhat hop it down the steps, so to speak. Where is it? I've lost it already. There it is. There we go. So now they are one unit of 3 oil control rings. Perfect. Let's move on to the big rings. So here I've got the bottom ring, just going to give it a wipe down. Second compression ring, and again, you can tell that because of the dot there. Now for this we use the pliers. Pinch these in here. Just going to feed it down. There we go. It's not binding up. Spins nicely, and what we're going to do is we're going to spin this round because much like the oil control ring on the bottom, you want your 2 compression rings to be at opposite ends of each other. So if that one pointing that way, the oil control ring pointing this way, we're going to do the top ring. We're going to drop the top ring. Got to be careful because these rings are very fragile. They snap very easily. There we go, and it's nice and loose in there. Set this down to one side, and let's do the same with the last piston. Piston number 1. Here we go, piston number 1. Let's get you guys in a little bit closer. There we go, have a bit of an interesting angle. Once again, it's easy just to do it the same way every time. Oil control ring, bottom groove. There we go, that is the last piston all ringed up. Right, here we are. Moment of truth, time to put the pistons in the cylinder bores. So let's tilt it a bit vertically. Start for piston number 1. And to do this, the ideal thing would be to use one of these nice ring compressor sleeves that fit over the bore, and then they're tapered, and you simply press the piston down through it. Very easy. Unfortunately, as you can see, this is a 4-inch one, and the bores are 4.065. So essentially 1.5 millimeters out, and that 1.5 millimeters makes all the difference. So we're going to have to use one of the these universal ones, which can be quite tricky, but I've done the other 4. I've had pretty good luck with it, so let's crack on. Put a bit of lube. I've already lubed up all the crank journals. Just going to lube up the bearings nicely, get them all sticky and lubed up. Right, here we go. Now just going to oil up the cylinder bore a bit. There we go. Now, place this in here, start it off. There we go. The trick I find is if you just get, don't need a hammer this big, but if you just tap down all the way around this, just so there's no gap. Because essentially the issue that you have with these is that as the piston rings pass through the transition, they have a tendency to pop out. If you make sure it's super flush, it doesn't happen. I'm just going to grab the end of a mallet. There we go. It's got a long way to go. There we go. Just smear some gunk on the rod end of the bearing. Nice. Just hand tighten the rod bolts. There we go. Piston 1 is now installed. Let's move on to piston 2. Piston 1's on this side, so piston 2 is now installed. Let's move on to piston 4. Right, here we go. All 8 pistons are now back in. All the rod bolts are now torqued down. Unfortunately, you guys would have missed that because my camera ran out of storage space, so that footage is lost forever, which is, you know, awesome. Anyway, just to prove a point, let's turn the engine over. There we go. It's all silky smooth. All the pistons are in properly. And of course, earlier on, we checked all the clearances. So this is going to be a really good, healthy motor. There we have it. I think that's where we're going to end today's episode, guys. So got the bottom end of the engine back in one piece and ready now for the other new bits to go in, cam, the heads to go back on, and really for it to be buttoned up and the engine build complete. So there's going to be plenty more of that in the next episode, so stay tuned and check out that one. Sorry once again if this was a bit of a boring episode, but trying to bring you guys along for the journey of building the engine and of course eventually swapping it into the car. I'm trying to be quite informative because it gives, well, content to watch. If I just slapped it all together and showed you the finished result, then there wouldn't be anything to watch really, would there? So that's that. But anyway, as I always say, if you enjoyed the video, please do consider subscribing to the channel, give the video a like, maybe drop a comment down below and all that, and I hope to see you guys on the next one. So stay tuned, see you then. Thanks for watching. Bye bye for now.